It is great to be at the Asia Society, and Victoria, thank you so much for that. I'm looking forward to a dynamic conversation, navigating your career amidst shifts in DEI. Have there been shifts? Okay, wait. I'd like each of you, if you can, to introduce yourself. I'll first of all give your title, but tell us what you do and why it might be relevant to this topic. How about that? Christina, I want to start with you. Christina Poon is General Manager, W New York, Union Square. Welcome, good to see you.
Thank you so much, Richard. Hello to the rest of the panel. So glad to be here with everybody. As you mentioned, I'm the General Manager of a hotel. Why does that matter? There aren't many Asian managing a hotel and being the face of a hotel property. And that's a chance that I've gotten with Marriott International, and I'm proud to be here and represent.
Do you live on premises, by the way?
No.
Okay. I
did for the first few days, but then moved out.
Not literally, right? Okay, great. Thank you so much, Christine. It's great to see you. Betty Ng, founder and chief executive officer, Inspiring Diversity LLC.
Hello, everyone. So, as Richard mentioned, I am the founder and CEO of Inspiring Diversity, and what I do is I focus on helping organizations build more inclusive culture where everyone feels that they belong. And also, really, as part of that, I help to empower people to be successful, to leverage their identities as their superpowers and become superheroes.
A lot of super in there.
Yeah. It's pretty super stuff, you know?
It's super awesome to me. Linda Yoon, therapist and founder of Yellow Chair Collective. I'm just interested in the name.
I can share that story too. There will be a separate story, but hi, my name is Linda Yoon. I'm a mental health therapist and founder of Yellow Chair Collective. Yellow Chair Collective is a mental health practice that provides not just only therapy, but mental health education. And for this topic, I want to note that there's a lot of intersectionality between mental health and diversity work. And we have seen increase of mental health workshop inquiries and also clients searching for mental health services because they're experiencing a lot of lack of psychological safety due to diversity issues. So I hope to have a great conversation here.
Oh, so important, right? I'm so glad that you're bringing that perspective to this conversation. Ingrid Giordano, Managing Director, Global Head of Early Career Talent Acquisition and Program Management. Citi. How's it going, Ingrid?
Hello. Hi, everybody. Ingrid Giordano. My job is leading our campus recruiting efforts. So I have the amazing opportunity to work across different affinity dimensions, bringing in several thousand people across 500 colleges in 30 countries around the world. And it's been my most favorite job that I've had.
I want to get personal and first of all, a great panel again of 4 leading women in their spaces, leading just leaders overall, but thank you for, because I was just talking about this often when we have these conversations, they're manels, and today it's great that so far we've had some great speakers that aren't all manels, so I appreciate that. Christina, tell me about your personal journey when it comes to inclusion, diversity, and equity.
Short answer is it's been bumpy.
Yeah.
How about that? We go through all kinds of things where people have bias, people have ideas where say, oh, well, you'll be nice and gentle because that's what we're known for, and so on and so forth. I'm glad to say that it has evolved a lot.
They said that to you?
Absolutely. For sure.
And what did you say in response when you heard that the first time?
Nothing.
Nothing, right.
Nothing. First time I was just nodding and probably agreeing.
And were you like reverse kicking yourself as you were walking away from that conversation?
Right then, half a second later,
yeah.
I was.
Okay, now when that happens, what do you do?
It doesn't happen anymore.
Aha, I like that. I like that. Yeah. Why doesn't it happen? And well, get us to that point. What is that you do differently now?
I am different. So I react differently. I am more sure of myself, and that introspection that I did really said, you know what? I have a place in this room at this table.
What do you say to people who don't quite want to hear that or believe that?
Too bad, so sad.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're here, we have a voice, and we have something important to say, and it matters because we contribute to absolutely the success of every company out there, if it's not even society in general. So we do have our place, and it's important that people hear it. And I don't say it in that way when I meet people. It's really to say, hey, tell me why do you have this perception? And I want to listen. I want to start by listening.
Yeah. I was just doing a session in DC yesterday, and I was saying, say what is not being said. Say what is not being said. You know it's right there. It's right in front of you, but people aren't saying it. Say what's being said. Betty, tell us about your... Yeah. Oh.
Yes. So I would really consider my journey with respect to DEI as one from going from pain to purpose and ultimately promise. So pain, really having been a victim of hate crimes from a young age to experiencing microaggressions, macroaggressions, even in the workplace and so forth. But ultimately how all of those experiences actually led to informing my purpose, which is really to build more inclusive culture for everyone, where everyone feels that they belong and actually feels confident in their own identities as their superpowers. And so ultimately, from there, leading to promise, which is those solutions that I really felt should have always existed, and providing those for everyone.
Did you have an experience similar to Christina? I'm going to guess yes, but tell us about that. Well, how you addressed that first time where you said, I've got to deal with this issue called inclusion or DEI, or what was that like? Did you say something back? What was that?
The first time, the first time it happened, really when I felt it, it was when one of my managers continually downplayed my and another woman of color's accomplishments and contributions. And it was really hard to deal with. But quite frankly, I was so lucky that I had proven my worth and value that I brought to the table throughout the organization. And I had a network of allies that actually said, hey, this is not the right environment for you. It's a toxic environment. We're pulling you out. And ultimately, they pulled me out and promoted me as well.
What was said, if you can remember generally, that you and your colleague were like, wow, I can't believe that actually just happened in front of us?
Well, we had different experiences, but the manager would be like, that wasn't such a big deal. Why are you making it seem like it was such a big deal when, whatever. And there's just sort of...
Yeah, nothing happened, right? Are you reading into this?
Yeah.
Right?
Completely. And so, but the thing is that you have to know when you're in a toxic environment that does not serve you, get out.
Yeah. Hey, Linda, how's it going?
Good.
Share an experience as the other two panelists have.
Yeah, so my journey also kind of similarly starts. I was immigrant, a young age, and I saw my parents getting discriminated, experiencing racism, myself as well. We immigrated to a very predominantly white community, and I just didn't have words. We didn't have words. We knew it was racism, but how? What do we do? And what we just went into was more model minority myth, right? Just put your head down, because even we say something, it doesn't matter. It's not gonna be heard. But that created so much chaos and hurt and confusion, a lot of mental health concerns as well. And later I decided to study social work and mental health. And even then, when we study Asian American communities, often say they don't seek therapy.
Yeah.
They don't talk about mental health. Like, do they even have needs? Look at them, they look very successful. Just general stereotypes, right? And when I first started my practice, it wasn't intended to. Now I primarily work with Asian Americans. I practice work with Asian American clients and education. However, when I initially started, that was not the, even though I wanted to, because that's my background, working with the Asian American community, people were saying, you're just not gonna have a business.
Sure.
They're not gonna come. There's too much stigma. They don't talk about it. So with the last few years, landscape changing, and how it brought the increased needs of like, hey, we do need to talk about it, that how mental health is impacted, how mental health looks like in Asian American community, and how that intersects with how we are perceived in the world, in the workspace, how we are seen or isolated. They're all interconnected. So that's kind of brought to where we are for my practice.
You never know where the road's going to take you, right? Ingrid, tell us about earlier in your road.
Oh, sure. So growing up, I come from a family that worked really hard, 7 days a week. I was one of maybe 1 or 2 Asians in my classes. And so I experienced that, in grammar school, in high school. And when I went to the work environment, I experienced something different of being either the only woman or the only Asian woman in a room. And I would say a pivotal change for me was I grew up with the view that you needed to be very humble. You were representing your family. You do not burden other people with your challenges. And I remember when we had the anti-Asian hate crimes and how difficult it was. Yeah. And I had shared with a team that, it was a really hard weekend. And I needed to take a pause because someone said to me, Ingrid, we don't think of you as Asian. And so I said, well, what do you think of me as? Ingrid. And it made me really pause of, did I conform so much that I wasn't embracing my culture? And so I've been very purposeful about that.
So do you now say, hi, I'm Ingrid, I'm Asian?
I do. I say, Ingrid, I'm Asian, Chinese, married to an Italian.
I'm Ingrid AAPI Giordano.
Yes.
Yeah. How about that? NHPI Giordano. Yeah. For me, as a male broadcaster, there's very few of us that sit in the anchor seat. And I remember the first 2 years at CNN. You're talking about how we perceive ourselves and what we do and describe ourselves to others and what's perceived as a result of that. I decided the first 2 years I was not going to pitch an Asian American story for the first 2 years, because then they wouldn't know I was Asian. Right? They'd never know if I didn't pitch a story. And I wouldn't get pigeonholed. And then a fellow anchor who was not AAPI looked at me and said, Richard, you're not pitching the stories that, and I was like, boy, how ridiculous am I? And that leads me to the next question, which is, tell us a story about checking a part of who you are at the door. And because all of you are AANHPI women, you also have the double dynamic in corporate America, where 1 + 1 unfortunately equals 3. Right? It's not only the difficulty for women in business, but you also add women of color. And that is the double doozy. In your time, can you remember when you used to check a part of who you are as you walked into that meeting? Because you knew, and this is a question I think, this is a question I love to ask folks. I'll ask the panelists first. Did you ever go to a meeting where you thought, I'm a woman walking into a meeting? Did you think about your gender, is what I'm saying, when you walked into a meeting? Panelists? Just raise your hand really quickly. I just want to curious. Just 2, 3, never? How about in the audience? Yeah. And how many men out here thought, I'm a man going into that meeting? Yes. See? And that's the stark reality of that unfortunate 1 + 1 = 3. All right, you were going to speak. Go ahead.
I was just going to say it happens mostly when I open up the door to get into a meeting and there's no other female in the room. That's when I go, whoa, I'm a female walking in there. That's right. That's when it hits me. Yeah. Because we're not yet at that ratio of 50-50 or whatever ratio you're aiming for. Sometimes I'm the only female in the room.
Have you ever checked anything at the door, like silly me checking mine? I'm not going to pitch any Asian stories. Now I don't do it. I bring everything through that door. Doesn't mean I'm going, hi, I'm Richard, AANHPI Louis. I don't do that, but it's a change for me.
Well, going into a room full of men, I might not bring up pictures of my kids and my dogs and my purses, that type of thing, right? I would do that with ladies because that's what we love to talk about and exchange on, our families and things that we love to do. It is different in a corporate world where it's a room full of men. We'll talk definitely more about business. And I noticed that they change too. They'll curve back discussions on golf. That happens too.
And college football. The story about you checking part of yourself at the door. Or yeah, just go. We're having coffee.
I have a story which I think would be interesting, and it really goes to, I think, at the end of the day, there is commonality across different affinities and different networks. So I'll share a story. 9 years ago, I was diagnosed with cancer, and I was the first person in my family to have cancer. And I remember feeling very focused on just getting the work done. I thought I was going to get away not telling anyone that I was sick. I thought I would get away from being out for 6 weeks without getting stuff done. And I remember that I did not want to be a burden to my team. And so I shared with them, hey, I have cancer, I'm going to be out. And I felt from that the most support I've ever felt. And I was able to get through it, thank goodness, 9 years cancer-free. But then 4 years later, I got a different cancer, and then I got mad. And I remember saying, how does this happen? And so still got through it. But, what I learned from that, going back to our culture of just not being a burden and doing really good work and being that model minority, that when I shared that with people, I felt more connection because I think, everybody has a story. Everybody knows someone who's been ill. And I think, one, it's just been part of my narrative. And so I just feel like a lesson that I would want to share with this group is just really thinking about different things that you're experiencing and just saying, maybe if you're a little bit vulnerable and you're sharing, I think, one, people will really appreciate it.
Yeah, that's a really good point about vulnerability. That's perfect for you, Linda. What's your perspective on what's the best way for us to think about that as we're thinking of our mental health and sharing things and how that helps us in the workplace? And I know the last 5 years is a very different context than it was before that.
Oh, yes. So last 5 years has been very difficult. And so probably, we don't have the data, but historically, increased number of Asian Americans seeking therapy for the first time. Like, it was such a hard time to find an Asian therapist because there wasn't enough. And we had 30 therapists at the time, and they're all booked, and trying to see we can fit people in somewhere. And mainly because common concern, complaint was that I just don't feel seen at workplace right now. There's so much violence going on. There's so much discrimination at work too that I feel, and no one's acknowledging it. I try to bring it up, but it's dismissed as if like that's not much of a problem, right? Right. So it's just feeling like living a life that is not seen by others, that creates a lot of lack of psychological safety, and they're just looking for that. And not just that, if you had experiences trauma, like racial trauma, immigration trauma, growing up, those are all kind of resurfacing very intensely. It's very intense time. And we had to just create space because one-on-one therapy was one space, but people want to come together. Hey, like, I'm not alone. Like, feel like we are here together, listening together.
What's the tip for me if I feel invisible? What should I do? What's the tip that you would, if we're having a one-on-one, and you would say, well, Richard, try this. What would you suggest to me?
So it's the opposite, right? You want to feel visible. So you have to identify like what is making me feel invisible first, because you have to have that awareness, right? If it's hard, that is okay. You can just start talking about it. Find a friend, colleague who's also experiencing that, or professional help can help too, who can give you words when you do not have the words to put your experiences to. And once you have that awareness and see what could help you feel, what do you need to feel seen? Sometimes we have very specific things that we want to hear, we want to see,
Right.
and identify those and see, you can see people around you or that can fulfill the needs. In workspace, it can be tricky because it may not be perceived, especially if we are just one individual here and there.
Sure.
So I do want to talk about gather, colleagues, gather allies, there are a lot of ERG groups now, right? So gather together and identify the need, bring it up,
Yeah.
Have open dialogue and identify what you need to see in the workspace to feel more seen.
And I know that's just the start of the list. I've got a lot of work to do here, but those are very good tips. Thank you so much. Betty, a time that you felt like you checked part of who you were at the door? A story around that?
When I checked a part of myself at the door, it was more, I would say, when I had mentioned that I'd lived in China for 3 years.
Yeah.
And then I came back to the U.S. I was born and raised here in the U.S., but I had been so immersed in living and working in China that I had learned to become very deferential to my elders. And then when I came back to the States, I went to Harvard Business School, and as you know, it's all about class participation. But then I actually had this mental block. And it was actually primarily male, as opposed to female. And I did find myself, not really speaking up as much. And actually, that was the very first time I ever sought out mental health support. I sought out a therapist.
Bravo.
For the first time.
Yeah.
Because growing up, it just was not something that we did.
Yeah.
And
not the T word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now, believe me, I'm all about therapy.
Yeah, thank you.
all
Yes,
about therapy.
that's right.
And so.
And we have physical coaches. Why don't we have brain coaches, right?
Yes. And I'm also a certified pickleball coach too. So.
Oh, okay. FYI. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So important. How do you read the room on diversity? What is it? Because, whenever you walk into a room, whether it's the meeting or it's this big group here or it's a new organization that you might be interfacing with, how do you read the room? And again, that's figurative and literal at the same time. How about you, Ingrid?
I feel like I'm an anthropologist. So
Yeah,
whenever I'm in a Zoom or I'm in a meeting, I do a lot of listening and observing. And I think if you just take that minute or two to just see what you're walking into, it helps you frame how you proceed with the conversation.
Like that quiet minute right before. It's just do that right, for 2 minutes.
Yeah, I love asking the question of, what are your objectives? Just hear from them what they have to say. And then based on their responses, you can read the room. Oh, we're not really focused on diversity right now or whatever. Then, but are you focused on creating belonging for everyone, inclusion for everyone? Just reading the room that way, asking questions, listening.
How about you, Christina? How do you read the room?
I actually like to tag team with other executives in my group. So I'll say, for example, I'm the lead presenter. I'll be focused on presenting. I won't be as paying attention to what's happening in the room. So please, could you watch that? Is everybody participating? What do you see in the nonverbal? And let's talk about that. And if there's anything that I should be aware during the presentation, signal to me. Because it's hard when you're presenting to notice what's happening in the audience. So I like to do that with my team.
I like to look out in the room when it's a literal space and look for the person that I would never see myself talking to. And then I go talk to that person.
Interesting.
And what we can do professionally, I think, in this inclusion space is make a list of 3 people you would never hang out with. You don't want to have lunch with them, right? And then you go have lunch with them, right? That's a little bit more than the 2 minutes or, the way but there's different ways we can read the room. How do you bring up diversity as an individual? We had an earlier session that was just so fantastic about, the ebbs and flows of this very topic. I ask this question quite often. If we can't use the word DEI without getting because this is all about, I do believe, discussing this stuff in swing spaces with swing thinkers and swing doers, not the choir, right? So how do you bring up this idea? And what's the word? Let me start with that. If it's not DEI, what's the word you think is going to be digestible by those who are on the swing?
Belonging.
Belonging?
Belonging.
I like to approach in like cultural awareness, celebration. That seemed to work a little better.
Cultural?
Belonging.
Hmm?
Belonging.
Belonging?
I agree with that word. Absolutely.
I was at a marketing conference and I asked that question of various CMOs and chief marketing, marketing leaders and heads of marketing. And one of the words, the two words, first of all, one was coming out of the 70s, multicultural, because it doesn't seem to have some of the baggage on it right now, whatever that means. The other one that I heard was intercultural, as another option to, because, when you bring up the word inclusion, it's kind of sometimes people, and that used to be the safe word.
Can I share a very short anecdote?
Yeah.
So,
I'm inclusive.
thank you, Richard. I know you've always been very inclusive. I work with a number of organizations, and one client actually had primarily Caucasian, audience, and they felt that they needed to have some DEI related training because they had gotten in trouble in the past. And so, but then this year, when I approached them, and I was focused more on the word belonging. And instead of it being like, belonging, yes, belonging, it's belonging for everyone.
Did you hug?
Were very excited. Not over the phone, but
no, the reaction was very positive, right?
Was so positive.
Yeah.
It wasn't this thing where people felt like they were being whipped into it. It was like, let's create belonging for everyone. They were so excited.
That's great. Why do you think they reacted so warmly to that?
Because it also meant it wasn't just about a conversation that was focused on race or gender. It was about how do you create belonging for everyone? Like even within a Caucasian community, people, with different athletic abilities, for example, or whatever. It just, all these other dimensions, they became much more aware of and open to in terms of the necessity to create belonging across dimensions.
Earlier in the other panel, there was discussion of, well, if you leave space for one, does it take space away from the other? Mm-hmm. And that was great discussion to be had, because there could be that perception.
Yeah.
If I am in agreement with diversity and inclusion, what does that mean for me? Does it mean less room for me? And I think belong takes that away, saying, no, everybody belongs and everybody has that room around that table. Otherwise, we'll make the table bigger, as mentioned earlier. So belong resonates that way, I feel.
Yeah, there's some game, and then we'll get to you, Linda, is an important dynamic, because each of you, as you bring up this topic, it's being thought. So is that the point where we say, do you think if you take $1 here, that dollar and put it over here, that therefore that's a minus here? Is that what you're saying? And then maybe it's important to say that out loud. And the reality is budgets for most DEI programs or inclusion programs is a lump sum. So it's hard to also move away from that reality unless the heads of every group goes straight to their own, if you will, cost center, separate, not together. And that's an evolution on the back end, because people will be saying that, well, it is that way, isn't it? It is that way, isn't it? So how do you get around that? Because you're a leader of this space. How would you answer that? I mean, that would be my answer is, we got to change the whole dynamic of where cost centers are.
Well, with Merit International, for example, it's been part of our DNA for over 96 years. So this is baked in on the way we do things. And we actually have a committee that really talks these things out and makes the decisions, and they represent different groups, all of them. So that way it's not one person deciding, or not even 3 person. It's really a full committee of people involved in all kinds of levels. Mm-hmm. So that way they can say, well, right now, this is what we need as a company, as a team, as a group, that would move things forward in what we've been practicing for so long.
A council, right.
Yes.
Linda, you want to say something?
Yeah, I love what you said, Christina and Betty. But just pointing back to the words people use, we get quite a bit of workshop inquiries, wellness, DEI, but people are less calling it DEI for sure. But I just look at what the language they're using, and especially when we get this inquiries from more Midwest or South, definitely going back to more multicultural, some intercultural as well. So I just want to add that that is coming back. They are using those words.
You're hearing it too, huh? Yeah.
So I would say I'm going to take the conversations in a different direction. I feel part of our responsibilities as leaders is to get people comfortable being uncomfortable. And so call a thing. And when we're looking at budgets, I'm relentless. And I start with, what is the return? Why are we doing this? What's the data? And I think if you take it from that perspective, you'll see more things get approved. I've had success getting things approved. But I've done the work. I've had my team do the work of, why are we doing it? What's our intention? What do we see the value being?
Wait, I gave you an inch. You want a mile now? Right? Do you get that? When you're asking for more, I gave you an inch, your group. Now you want a mile. Do you get that?
Nope.
You don't get that. Do you know what I'm saying? Because it's like, oh, you've had a good year. You've had great years. You know, we're going to pull back now. Because that, as leaders, is an important objective that you've got to pursue, right? And you've had success, though, Ingrid, in that.
I have, but I think it goes to the crux of building relationships. Mm-hmm. So I don't think you want to go to someone that you've never met and ask for X dollars for something.
Yep.
You've got to be really intentional of understanding your stakeholders, building those relationships, and having that common goal.
Give us, each of you, your best practice in this space. Give us a tip, because we have a lot of champions here at the Asia Society gathering for this panel. What is your best practice? What's your tip, your piece of advice as you've gone through your careers that you would offer to somebody else? We'll start with you, Betty.
Well, I would say focus on advocating not just for yourself, but also for others. And I think that's really important because back to relationships, right? When we advocate not just for ourselves, but for others, we build these relationships, right? And also when we're advocating for others, we oftentimes do wind up benefiting too, right? And so I think it's just really important to focus on that and the relationship building.
What's the best way to advocate for others in work? How can you do what? Yeah.
You know, so for example, when I was in my last corporate role, I started an Asian leadership initiative that didn't exist, right? Sometimes it is about creating opportunities that, you know, no one's saying, hey, Betty, would you like to do this, right? But you proactively think about what can help others, help them to achieve their goals and create that community.
Best practice?
I would say stay resilient. Change is happening every day, every second. That's not going to go away, but have a plan and say, okay, this is where I want to go. This is my ultimate goal. Build yourself the steps to get there, have a plan, talk it out, find allies, as mentioned earlier, and you'll get there, but stay open to change and understanding that it will come, and get yourself the tools you need to deal with that change, and you will be successful. But if you just sit back and say, oh no, change is happening, I don't know what to do, well, you're not going to go far that way. So that's why you need to embrace it, really.
How about you, Linda?
I just want to address, burnout is a big issue in Asian American professionals. Many different reasons I can go in long time, but so there's two parts that I would like to kind of suggest, especially in newer workers going in, that burnout is real. So to prevent burnout, we talk about work balance, and that is really needed. And but besides that, knowing your values, take some time to know your why and your value systems. And does it, the work you're doing, can you try to be in teams or initiatives or projects that feel more aligned with your values and your why and what you want to do? And also recognizing there's a limitation in workspaces, no workspace is gonna meet all your needs. So try to expand your network. be involved in community, nonprofits, be a board member, and that will also expand your network, also bring more fulfillment in your life. That also brings more, that also expands to your workspace as well.
How about you, Ingrid?
I love what you just said. I'm going to take a lot of that back. I think for me, I'm going to go back to my childhood, to something that my grandmother taught me that did not really manifest itself until I got into the workplace. And it was really around listening, really listening. And so, whether I'm on campus meeting students or I'm mentoring people in our organization, there's been a switch over the past couple of years where I've been very intentional about listening to people when they come to me for advice or want suggestions. You're looking them in the eye, you're repeating back what they said. And what I've learned is everybody wants to be seen, everybody wants to be heard. But what I've been the most grateful on is I feel everyone I've mentored and I've listened, I think I gave them freedom and empowerment to move forward. And that would be just my advice of listening is that superpower that I don't think a lot of people have.
One of the things that we, and Victoria was bringing that up a little bit earlier, in my team's research, as we found, we were asking questions about perceptions of AAPI workers from non-AAPI workers. And the perception is that to a greater degree with AAPI workers than any other group, that we stay within ourselves, within our own. So the question I have before we get to Q&A here for all of you is when it comes to ERGs and BRGs and the institutions that we all are part of, what's the good, should I try to join a non-AAPI ERG? Should I join the Women's Network at NBC? Should I join the Veterans Network, which is all part of this inclusion program? And if so, what's your reflection on the power of ERGs and BRGs to exercise and try things you were just saying, Linda, that's outside of what we expanding our networks, being uncomfortable, to your point. Betty?
Well, one of the things I always encourage my clients to do is when they have ERGs, to make sure that there's cross collaboration amongst the ERGs, so that no one ERG is really working within a silo. And so also as an individual, well, also when ERGs collaborate, they can pool their resources and do more too, right?
Yeah.
But as an individual, I do think it is important for you to get out there and, show up at the women's, employee resource group or whatever it is, because I think it is important for us to be seen as allies for others and not just always thinking and sticking to ourselves.
Yeah. And I find when I've done that, I just show up.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, listen and learn, right? And it's what we find in one group. If it's the Black Employees Network, Ben at 30 Rock, you will sit there and you'll learn some of the best practices you can take back to the AAPI groups. Yeah.
But do avoid showing up in one of those places and try to sell something. That's the weirdest experience I have, is that if I go to a women's forum and then I'll say these guys show up and they're like, oh, by the way, I represent this air conditioning company. You're like, okay, well, why are you here? So show up with a purpose. Then that makes sense to be there. But don't show up just to say, oh, I checked that box. I showed up at a women's event.
Right.
Be there to actually help, support, advocate.
Yeah, and to connect, right? Because, while you may not be a woman, right? It's about those shared values, right?
Yes.
And shared experiences still, right? And how can you connect and then ultimately build those relationships and be advocates for one another?
Absolutely. And, I think one of those ideas, as all of us are members of ERGs and BRGs in here, is, that's great. And it's to also have some grace when there are those from other groups coming to your group that, me going to the Women's Network at 30 Rock, I don't think all of a sudden I have got the full rights and privileges of all women because I went to a women's event, right? Or because I say I'm a feminist does not mean that I'm all of a sudden an expert and I know all the journeys that women go through. But maybe I'm just starting, right? I'm a 1-year-old member of the Women's Network. So I'm this tall, right? And I'm getting to learn. And I think that's an important part of getting us all together outside of this room, as well as in ERGs and BRGs, and with all the people that we get to meet. ERGs, BRGs.
So if I think about this from a couple of different perspectives, I had an opportunity to be on a nonprofit board. And as part of being on that board, it was during the George Floyd unfortunate events. And I remember joining the group as they were talking about this activity and just being there for the community. I learned so much. I really did. And I would just encourage everyone, if you can join a different affinity network and just show up, you're going to get so much more out of it because you just get different perspectives.
We're going to go to Q&A in a second, so if you can raise your hand, and I think there's a mic here. We have a little bit of time to get your comments and questions. But when you said that, Ingrid, it brought to mind some of the perceptions we have of other groups. And until you get there, you don't know if they're true or not. For me, I was sent during George Floyd, during Freddie Gray and Michael Brown to various towns in the country. And one of the sub storylines was that in those spaces, the Black community and AAPI community didn't get along. And here I was coming in one of the most crucial moments in those communities, and I'm AAPI in largely Black communities. And guess what happened when I got there? It was not true, those sub storylines, but I had to be there, right? And these sub storylines were getting overplayed. And that's part of this, right? There's all these perceptions, and then you hear, and so by going to these different groups, we all will get to learn more about each other, during the good times and the tough times. The four of you are encouraging us, and you've given us some great personal tips, sharing your personal stories, and I really appreciate that because, as was said, the vulnerability and the openness by which we will share your best practices with us is the way we can now go out and do the same. So thank you to all four of our great panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.